we'll do now is we'll walk through the review for the first exam, covering chapters 1 through 3. And what I suggest that you do is use this as part of your study guide, of course, prior to taking the exam, of course. But also make sure that you go through the previous lectures, that you review your quizzes, 2, for chapters 1 through 3. Make sure you go through the book, etc., and use this as a study guide, if you will, this review. At any rate, so onward we go. Oh, I think I lost you for a moment there. At any rate, life situation, personal values. So your personal factors include such things as age. You're a different person when you're 16 than when you're 30, or you're 25, what have you. Different preferences, you have a different reality, again, if you will. So onward we go. So their age, income, different incomes, which also impact your choices, if you will. The household size, if you're on your own, it's different than if you have a partner or if you have a family, etc. And finally, or at least one more aspect that we'd be looking at are your attitudes, your own beliefs, your own set of criteria that you have. And again, these are very personal things. Your life situation is affected by all these personal events that we've talked about. Personal events meaning where you're at in your life, how you experience how your preferences and priorities and so on and so forth fall into line. Again, values are personal beliefs, and the idea that a person considers correct, desirable, important. So you're basing decisions on your own personal set of values, if you will. Anyway, so moving on, when we're looking at the financial system and economic factors, a security, we'll do some definitional things here too. First, rather, a security is a financial instrument that represents debt or equity. So difference between the two. A security, again, is a financial instrument. A debt security or an equity security. A debt security is, in essence, it's a loan. So if you're holding this debt security, that means that you are lending someone something else, somebody something, and what is your expectation what are you expecting to get back? So debt securities would include such things as bonds, and there are others. Just think of it again as a loan. It represents money borrowed by companies or governments, meaning that if you're lending your money, period, what are your expectations? One is that you would expect to have that money returned to you, those funds returned to you. And secondly, speaking of opportunity cost, time value of money, things that we'll be talking about repeatedly as we go forward, is that you would have an expectation of receiving some compensation for you being parted from your money, and that's interest. So that would be the interest that you would be getting in addition to receiving your principal or the original loan back, okay? So those are debt securities. Equity securities are stock or ownership, for example, in a company and an entity of some sort, right? So what that means is that if you own a share of stock in any company, say it's Microsoft or Google or what have you, what is the value? What is the price of that stock? It all depends. It all depends on where it's at in the market, meaning the stock market on that particular price and at that particular point in time, what the price is, if you will. This differs from debt securities because debt securities are very carefully spelled out how much that we're talking about, how much that debt security, that bond, for example, what the principal is, how much it's actually, the face value, $1,000, and the terms of the interest and so on and so forth, or the yield. All these are very, very specifically spelled out versus equity securities. Equities are, again, they fluctuate. Other examples of securities that we'll be talking about going forward would be like mutual funds, certificates of deposits, and commodity futures. Mutual funds, basically what we're talking about mutual funds is there would be groupings of stocks. So you buy a mutual fund and it's called an index, for example. And an index meaning it targets a certain type of stocks. So if you want to have an S&P index fund, that means the Standard & Poor's index fund, which means large capital, large firms, and the five, we'll just say the 500 largest firms that are out there, for example, corporations, and you have ownership in all of them through this mutual fund. The mutual fund buys stocks typically based on, it could be for whatever the criteria that it's being employed, but the size of the company. So if it's a Google, for example, they would have more Google stocks, not number of stocks, but the actual value of the purchase would be higher for Google. Anyways, I'm getting into it too deeply, but I think that you kind of follow. That's what a mutual fund is, and that will be very, very important going forward. Certificates of deposits are basically time deposits where you're receiving a certain amount of interest going forward. And commodity futures, this is the when you're going out and buying a bushel of corn. And you're buying it in the future. So you're paying $50, or I shouldn't say $50, say $8 a bushel or $5 a bushel for corn that is not going to be delivered, if you will, for another 3 or 4 months. Get the idea. Those are commodities futures and all interesting stuff, but we would be probably in this class we'll be sticking with the concepts of debt securities, equity securities, and mutual funds, if you will, for the most part. So economics. So when we talk about economics, economics is definitionally, so far as the author is concerned, they talk about is the study of how wealth is created and distributed. More specifically, it is economics is a study of scarcity. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you get what you need. Our wants are unlimited. Our needs are not. Our needs are limited, and we need enough to get by. We need enough to purchase this. We need enough to do this and to do that. At any rate, we'll stick with the author's study of how wealth is created and distributed. Price of a specific good is determined by what is called supply and demand. Supply and demand, we've all heard these expressions. And where they come together, that point where supply crosses demand, that's what's called the equilibrium point, or the market clearing price, if you will. At any rate, there are many things that go along with it, but we'll just kind of stick again with the context of the chapters that we're looking at. Just as high demand, for example, for a consumer product forces prices up, its price up. A high demand for money forces interest rates up. So an increased demand for money, if you will, drives interest rates up. And this price of money is reflected both in terms of limited supply of money and the demand for it. So the takeaway from this is that when we talk about prices fluctuating up and down, the interest rate is just that. It's the price of money. So it's a price. It's just like a pound of buying a pound of hamburger. The price goes up and down. Buying a gallon of milk, price goes up and down. Buying a gallon of gasoline, price goes up and down. Borrowing money, the price, the interest rates fluctuate. They go up and down. It's a simple prospect. So banks, savings and loan, credit unions, insurance companies, investment companies facilitate these financial activities in our society. They are what are called financial intermediaries. Again, banks and savings and loan, credit unions, those are called depositories versus insurance companies, investment companies. There are different types of borrowing, lending, contractual financial intermediaries, but they're all financial intermediaries nonetheless. So the Federal Reserve System, or the Fed, as it's also referred to, is our central banking system. And it influences the supply by borrowing funds, changing interest rates, and buying or selling government securities. So what they do is that when we talk about it influencing the money supply, it increases by impacting the supply of money, influencing the supply of money, the availability of credit more specifically, that causes interest rates to fluctuate, to go up and down, or it has a tremendous impact on that, if you will. At any rate, next thing, and we're going through these economic factors. There's quite a bit here. So if we look at spending again by Americans for foreign goods, this drives it drives again. This is the foreign. This would be for foreign exchange, the dollar value, the dollar price of a Chinese yuan or a euro, for example. These fluctuate as well. This is the point, and there's much more that gets into that, but that's just a quick highlight. Consumer prices and also producer prices, but we'll focus on consumer prices, consumer spending, interest rates, and other economic factors also affect the financial planning environment. Inflation, speaking of consumer prices, we have inflation, deflation, a lot of different ways of looking at this, but inflation is the general rise in the level of prices. So specifically, if the inflation rises, the value of your dollar that you've got a dollar bill, if inflation increases by 5%, that dollar bill that was once worth $1, if you will, because of that 5% inflation, which decreases the value, the spending power of that dollar by 5%, or it becomes 95 cents in essence. So the main cause of inflation is an increase in demand without a comparable increase in supply. This is called, specifically, it's called demand pull inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. So meaning that's kind of counterintuitive what I would just said, but the point is that if the demand, if the amount of goods that are available remains steady, and there's an increased demand for those goods, it's going to do what? Drive the price up. So inflation, lastly, and there are a lot of different things go along with it, but it's very harmful for folks, particularly on fixed incomes. The rule of 72. This is one of the things that I want you to take away from this class. One of the important things that you'll take away, and you'll be using this over and over again. So the rule of 72 is used to determine how fast prices will double, or the value of something will double. You simply take 72 divide 72 rather by the current inflation rate, or anything that we're actually talking about. For example, if you have an inflation rate of 6%, prices will double over 12 years. 72 divided by 6 equals 12. Likewise, if you have an investment we'll set aside inflation, that's earning 6%, that if say you start with $1,000, that over in 12 years time, that would become $2,000. So it takes 12 years. 72 divided by 6 is 12, or 12 years. Whereas if it was 8%, 72 divided by 8 is 9 years. So the higher the rate, the more quickly it doubles. It really is what it is. Consumer spending is the total demand for goods and services in the economy. This influences such things as the availability of jobs. You know, if there's if you have more demand for goods, consumers are spending more. That means that more goods have to be produced, and it's also increased potential for the income associated with employment. A lot of things that go along with this. Interest rates represent again the cost or the price of money. Like everything else, money again has a price. The forces of supply and demand influence those interest rates, as we mentioned before. you know, just anyways, we'll leave it at that. It's very straightforward. So onward to this last piece of developing personal financial goals. Not the last piece, but it's the next thing that we want to walk through. And then many Americans, most Americans have money problems, and they're due. I shouldn't say many. Everybody has money problems to one degree or another. And in general, they're due to poor planning, weak financial habits, extensive numbers of market influences that are out there in the form of whether we're talking about advertising, marketing ploys, and availability of the products, and so on and so forth. All these things impact this. They have an influence on, you know, the problems that we have with money, with our money, right? So, at any rate, so when we're looking at the types of financial goals, for example, we're looking at short-term, so tactical, think of in terms of very short-term. If we're looking to save an extra $10 this week, how do we go about doing that? Intermediate goals, so we're looking at time frames. So we'll just say, for example, short-term is within a year. Intermediate would be the next 1 year to 5 years, and long-term goals would be beyond that 5 year. And we'll just using that as somewhat of an example. And so what would go into those buckets, again, the short-term goals, trying to save $10 extra this week, 1 to 5 year, these intermediate goals, if you will, trying to save to buy a new car, or to make a purchase on a home, so on and so forth. Long-term goals might be such things as paying off the home, saving for your retirement, saving for college, and so on and so forth. So we have two different types of goods, if you will, and they would be, well, they're consumer goods and durable goods. So we're looking at goals associated with the two of them. Consumer product goals, for example, these are tactical. These are very short term, typically, you know, where we're buying things that we're consuming basically on a daily basis, if you will, which includes such things as food, clothing, entertainment spending. May not be on a daily, up to a year, we'll say. Those are consumable goods or consumer goods versus durable goods. Durable goods are or durable product goals would be involved with the durable goods would be such things as appliances, cars, sporting equipment. Think about 1 year, things that go beyond that 1 year. The last thing that we're kind of missing, and this is something the author brings up as interesting, is what we call intangible goods. Intangible goods is associated with the tangible goods would be intangible goals. These goals would relate to such things as, you know, personal relationships, marriage, and health, how to maintain your health, how to do this, and education, how much education you're going to have, how you're going to do your leisure. Setting up all these things are very important. So the goal setting guidelines, if you will, there's the acronym that the author has is called SMART. So be specific, measurable with a specific amount, action-oriented, realistic, and time-based. So at any rate, the goal-setting guidelines are of great importance. You have to, again, these are things that you would be employing over and over again. So next, we're looking at the opportunity cost and the time value of money, something we've already talked about before, and we get into typically when people think of opportunity cost and time value of money, opportunity cost in particular, you think about it in terms of financial. We think about that financial trade-off, if you will. This is worth $10 and I'm foregoing something that, or this is going to cost $10 and I'm foregoing something that cost $15. It's more expensive. That's not, it's part of this opportunity cost scheme, but the idea is, again, when we're looking at personal opportunity cost, even financial opportunity cost, we're focusing on our next best competitive option. So personal opportunity cost, an example of it, studying or working, or shopping, that you're going to, if you're studying or you're working or you're shopping, you're doing that instead of doing something else. That is when you talk about personal opportunity cost. Financial opportunity cost kind of gets more into that when we start talking about money, and more specifically when we're looking at the time value of money. The time value of money is the time that you're using the money for something. It's going to do any number of things. It could be sitting there, you could save it, you could spend it, you could consume it, but the time value of money refers to you made the decision to not spend that money. So for example, you're going to defer consumption, you're going to put it into a savings account. So what is the opportunity cost? What is the financial opportunity cost associated with that? Where does this time value of money come into play? The time value of money means that if you're putting into savings, you're being separated from your money. And that time that you're separated from that money, there's a tremendous opportunity cost that's associated with it, because if you're separated from your money, you can't do what? You can't spend it. Simple. All right. And anyway, embedded in that, we're looking at, these are things that we'll be talking about in greater detail as we go forward. We talk about the future value of money. It's also referred to as compounding, as the amount of which current savings will increase over a period of time based on interest rates and the time period involved. Future value calculations may be for both a single amount and equal deposits. So we're looking at how much this is actually going to be worth. It's compounding over a period of time, whether you're talking about one period, 1 month, one year, etc., one day. But as you roll through that time frame that you're talking about, that's where the compounding comes into play. All right, because you move from your original principal up to another value, a higher value, if you will, hopefully. Anyway, present value also is referred to as discounting, is the current value of that future sum that we were talking about based on interest rates and time periods involved. And that can be used for both single amounts and series of amounts, if you will. So moving on. So achieving your financial goals. So again, achieving your financial goals, walking through the components of, so throughout your life, you have to, we've already talked about this, but in moving through your life, each individual has needs each individual has needs that the intelligent use of available financial resources can satisfy. Simply put, financial planning involves deciding how to obtain, protect, and use those resources. Again, financial planning involves deciding how to obtain, protect, and use those resources, right? So it's all about what? It's all about acquiring wealth, if you will, maintaining that wealth and helping it to grow, protect it, and then actually using that. So this is something that it's very simple, but it gets complicated when you start digging into the details, how you go about doing this. And it all sounds good, right? So you save money, and then you make sure that that money is protected in terms of earning enough interest so that you can spend it later on. This is something that's akin to what we call in finance, it's the life cycle hypothesis. Meaning when you're young, you save as much as you can. You're spending at the same time. You're spending more typically than you're actually more than your income, but you're still trying to save at the same time. And you're saving for the ultimate goal of doing what? Being able to enjoy a retirement at some point in time. So at any rate, so the components of personal financial planning, there are 8 major components that go into this. So one is obtaining those financial resources, as we mentioned before. 2 would be planning for current living expenses and future financial security. So you're making a map, if you will, that you'll be following. Saving for emergencies, unexpected bills. It's always out there. There's always something unexpected. Replacement of major items and special purchases. Meaning, when you buy a car, and I know that you're buying it on time, you're not typically paying. If you bought a new car, for example, for $25,000, you would be paying for it over the course of the next at least 3 years, maybe as many as 7. There are 6 years, I think they've got. No, but the point is that in addition to paying for the car, you'd be thinking about buying your next car, whether that's in 5 years' time or 6 years' time or what have you. We'll be getting into these conversations, if you will, topics as we move forward. But the idea is that you're always trying to think about this next purchase that you would have to make. So savings again for emergencies, unexpected bills, replacement of major items that we just mentioned about a vehicle, special purchases that you have to allow for. So in essence, you're borrowing also, because again, when you're younger in particular, you're borrowing, and you're borrowing in a responsible manner to meet your needs, etc. Spending to meet daily living requirements, living needs. Managing risk through insurance decisions. We'll be getting into insurance, if you will, a bit later, but insurance is the idea is that you're trying to set aside something in the event that something occurs that you're not really planning for, right? It's really what insurance is all about. Investing for long-term financial security and retirement and estate planning. So this is the process that we go through, right? So developing, next you're looking into developing a flexible financial plan. Financial plan is a formalized report that summarizes your current financial situation and analyzes your financial needs and recommending, if you will, a direction for your financial activities. Financial activities may be organized on the basis of spending, saving, investing, and borrowing decisions. So again, spending, saving, investing, and borrowing decisions. So implementing your financial plan. The most important strategy for success in development of this implementation is developing financial habits that will help you to accomplish those short-term and long-term goals of security, right? So you use this set spending plan that will help you stay within those guidelines, your income. So you're matching your income with your expenses, and you're trying to line these things up as best you can. So another thing is that by studying this this personal finance idea and going through this over and over again, there are tons of options that are available to you out there online, etc. So at any rate, so we'll leave it at that. So next thing we're looking at is this is actually more of the nuts and bolts and digging into the appendix in chapter 1. Okay. So in chapter 1, the first topic, if you will, or the appendix rather, would be the interest rate, the basics of interest rates. We've already talked about this. It's the time value of money, the opportunity cost of deferred consumption. Since you're not spending it now, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity costs involved. So in essence, again, interest rates represent that cost or the price of money. And again, as we said before, like everything else, there's a price for money. There's a price for hamburger per pound. There's a price um, for milk per gallon, if you will, or half gallon, however the measure is that you're looking at. There's a price for gasoline by the gallon rather, and what's at play behind this is that the whole concept of the supply and demand. Supply and demand. So if there's an increased amount of demand for anything, what's going to happen to the price? The price will it has a tendency to rise, if you will. If there's a vice versa, if there's an increased supply of anything, and money in this case, interest rates in this case again would tend to decrease. And when we talk about consumer, there are different aspects, different sectors. This is back to economics, if you will. So there's consumer, business, government, and foreign sectors, if you will. The consumer sector, the business sector, government sector, and the foreign sector. And they all have different supply and demand relationships so far as money is concerned. And so if they increase, if any one of those or all of those in net increase the demand for the money, interest rates will tend to rise. Simple as that. So when we talk about the future value of anything, whether we're talking about a single amount or if we're talking about a series of equal amounts, it's called an annuity. What we're looking at is the concept of compounding. And compounding, what that means is that, let's just say you get $100. You have $100 and you're saving something for 10 years and you're getting 10% interest on that. So $100 after 1 year, that interest of 10% is $10. So your $100 after 1 year turns into what? $110. So in the second year, what happens is that you have 10% interest based on what? Not $100, but on the $110. Okay? So what that means is then after 2 years, your $110, you add $11, at 10% of $110. You add $11 to that total, and your total now becomes $121, and so on and so forth. So this is what we talk about in terms of an annuity. So this is going forward, if you will, the present value of so if we look at that as looking at the future value, how it's going to look going forward. Present value is referred to, so whereas the future value speaks to annuities, the present value speaks to what's called discounting. So we're discounting, we're going back to the present, back to what it's worth right now. And we'll get into this in greater detail, but the takeaway from this, again, is that that 2 years from now, remember we said before, it was $121. So what would be the present value of that $121 from 2 years going back to the present would be $100 is really what we're looking at. And again, at any rate, the last thing we're looking at is the present value to determine a loan payment. A loan payment, this is something that you can walk through on your own, but if we're borrowing $8,000 with a 5% interest rate to be repaid in 5 equal payments at the end of the next 5 years, you can do this several different ways. There are online calculators. There are financial calculators that you can use. You can use Excel spreadsheets. There are formulas out there to determine this. There are different handheld calculators like a TI or a Hewlett-Packard handheld financial calculator. It's easy enough to do. And frankly, you can look at the end of the chapter, there are time value. There are different tables that are available in the back of this appendix in this first chapter, and you can simply look at the table and determine what factor that we're going to be using. So in this case, we're looking at 8,000, and again, we're looking at 5% interest to be paid over over the next 5 years, and that factor is 4.329, which we arrive at the present value of this loan, the present value of this loan is $1,848. Straightforward as that, okay? So now we're looking at the employment search strategies, and a variety of techniques you can use in assist in expanding your experience, assessing employment opportunities, and applying, and even applying for your next position. Always thinking ahead, right? Always think about your next job. I do mean that, but at the same time, I've run across many people that are never satisfied with their current job, and at any rate, there's always a balancing act involved. So, first thing we're looking at is obtaining the employment experience that's required, that is desirable. Work experience, especially in the beginning, if you will, of your work life, and actually it goes on forever, but you can gain through part-time or summer employment, cooperative education programs, internships, paid or unpaid, volunteer work, class assignments, campus projects and activities, all these things that it's back to what we were talking about before about opportunity cost and so on and so on. Opportunity cost goes both ways, meaning for both you and for your employer. They want to take a chance on you, but they would like to hire you, for example. They would prefer to hire you than not hire you, typically speaking, if they're looking for an employee. But it's just so long as if you have the right set of tools and attitude and all the other things that kind of go along with that. And the way that you get that is by doing some of these things, working part-time jobs, summer jobs, so on and so forth, and internships, volunteer work, and testing the waters, and it all improves your potential worth to your potential employer. So using career information resources or sources such as library, so everything's pretty much online now, but you can go through career development offices either at your school or there are oftentimes community municipal services that are available, and also the state of Michigan has Michigan Works and so on and so forth. But the process of networking is very important. Networking basically is getting out there and seeing people and making contacts and learning about jobs and asking people questions and so on and so forth. And it takes any number of areas, if you will, meaning that you can talk to your neighbor. You can I've mentioned this before already, but if you want to know something about what an accountant does, for example, you can go into a CPA and knock on the door and just talk to some people and say that you'd like to talk to somebody for this informational interview or so on and so forth. And people are, frankly, they're in some ways, it's something that it may take them by surprise, and they may say, well, I don't have time, and so on and so forth, but typically they will find time for you, whether immediately or sometime you can set up a schedule to do that. So anyway, identifying those job opportunities, again, through advertisements, through Monster, through Indeed, through all these other job sites that are available, different trade papers, specifically, like for if you're looking for a job in education, there are tons of sites out there for educators, the Chronicle of Education. There are lots and lots of job boards that are available to you out there. ZipRecruiter, so on and so forth. And again, you can oftentimes by just knocking on doors, have your resume with you and asking if you can drop a resume off, or to possibly talk to somebody at an organization that might potentially be hiring, especially in these times. It's funny because people say that there are no jobs available, but this is always the case. But there are always somebody is hiring, and there's often a mismatch, meaning they can't find the right person, and you just might be that person, and you have to continuously, go through this process and checking off boxes. And the main thing is to, even though you think it can be disheartening, you think you're perfect for the job and you're not hired, and the potential employer never even gets back to you. That's never happened to me. It happens all the time to everybody. Trust me. So the other thing is that as we're going through this, I alluded to this somewhat before. It's this idea called job creation, which involves developing your own skills to suit the potential job that you want. So you go on an interview, for example, and you find out that you're not as good in Microsoft Office, in terms of employing Excel as well as you really ought to be, as much as they would like. So you're kind of go back to the drawing table and say, well, drawing board. And you say, well, I have to develop my skill set. I have to develop different skill sets, whether it's technical or soft skills, if it's communication skills, something that would be more in line with the job that you want. There are numerous. You don't have to go out and get a degree necessarily. You can take courses toward getting certificates in various areas. Anyway, you get the idea with it. So at the large, back to what I was saying, visiting, stepping into someone's office or knocking on their door, simple as that oftentimes. And open your mind up to different possibilities, different applications to your skill set that's out there. It doesn't have to necessarily be something in the private sector. It could be in the public sector, meaning in nonprofit or something along those lines. And always keep track of the skills that you do develop. Keep track of them, in terms of like codifying them, putting them in their resumes. We'll be talking about that as we go forward now. So, speaking of which, when we're looking at resumes, let's see. Yeah, so when we're talking about the actual resume, we'll get into that in a bit later. So I passed this up already, but when we're applying for employment, the 2 steps involved would be submitting resumes and having a cover letter to go along with it, and finally would be the actual interviewing process. At any rate, onward. So financial and legal aspects of employment itself. This kind of drills down into the different, the criteria that are out there for pretty much every job that's any kind of a formal job that there is out there. So you definitely want to do your research on the company. So back to accepting an employment position. Before accepting that position, you may want to do further research again into that company to find out what company policies are and the procedures. And oftentimes we overlook these things because we're so happy to find the job that we kind of overlook these things. And these are things that will come back to haunt you at some point later on. So you definitely have to kind of do your research in this regard. So you definitely want to go in and evaluate the employee benefits. And these are the benefits that would be associated with your health care and so on and so forth. So financial benefits may be viewed in 3 different time frames. We'll start with that. The immediate short-term benefits, salary, of course, and other monetary payments. Interim benefits would include such things as the amount of vacation days you get, different policies that would be associated with with days off and sick days and all the things that kind of go along with that. The insurance that would be made available to you, any kind of health insurance, group life insurance, so on and so forth. If there's tuition remission, reimbursement policies associated with paying for school, going on continuing education, and sometimes there are even discounts. Typically, there are, like for cell phones and so on and so forth. If you're in a larger company, for example, it's typically the case. Um, at any rate, those are like the interim, if you will. Long term would be such things as associated with retirement programs, profit sharing, things along those lines. And so, the takeaway from this, I shouldn't say the takeaway, but the first thing that we always look at or consider, whether it's the number one priority or not, is your actual salary, what you'll be getting. And that salary that you will be getting is depending upon how much you are worth to the company, how much education, training you have, the company itself, the size of the company, how generous the company is, so to speak, right out of the box, and also the salaries for comparable positions. This is an important point because you don't want to be overpaid. I should say this. Of course, you don't want to be underpaid for a job. You don't want to accept a job where you're being underpaid, undercompensated, etc. But it's also just as dangerous, and sometimes even more dangerous, if you're overpaid. Because if you're overpaid for the job, and you oftentimes don't really know this going in, but if you're overpaid for the job, the problem with that is that your employer's expectations will certainly be high. Not to say they wouldn't be otherwise, but they would certainly be high if they were paying you more than the market rate, if you will, for your job, because the expectation is that you'll be performing at a much higher level. Not to discourage you, but this is something that is a dangerous place to be, because if you are too expensive for the company, chances are you'll be out the door rather quickly if you can't keep up or don't measure up to what their expectations are. So this happens more frequently than you realize. So, so your performance, and again, it's one thing to get a job, it's another thing to keep the job, and keeping the job is where the performance and quality, work responsibility, and all these other things that influence what your salary will be kind of going forward. It's important to get an appropriate salary going in the door, but it's also keeping in mind that your salary going forward will be dependent upon how much you are worth to the company, really, is really what it comes down to. So cafeteria style employee benefits programs allow workers to base their job benefits on certain credit systems that are set up for personal needs, and included in these flexible benefit plans, including these cafeteria style plans, would be such things as paying for medical insurance, paying for dependent care expenses, maybe buying more vacation days. Say, for example, if you're married and your spouse has insurance through their company, you might be able to use that cafeteria plan to buy more vacation days, again, as I said, rather than buying the medical insurance. So there are two methods that you can assess the employee benefits. One is the market value, where you calculate and determine the specific monetary value based on the cost if you had to pay for the item yourself. Secondly would be future value, where you would long-term worth of such employee benefits again, such as like pension plans, where say they have matching retirement, meaning that if you kick in 5%, the employer kicks in 5%, and how much that is worth in going forward, if you will. The other thing that's part of this, part and parcel of it, is the tax exempt side of it, or tax deferred, such as, for example, healthcare benefits are before taxes. So that's something that's worth more to you if your employer were to to pay for your health care coverage, up to a certain point. Anyways, this is all straightforward. And lastly, your employee rights are the employee rights are very clearly laid out there in general terms, and you can contact your human resources or your new human resource department for further details on that. And there's plenty of information available online, such things as wages, minimum wage, overtime, the criteria for overtime, what fits, what is required to be paid for overtime, and what the rates are, and so on and so forth. Workers' compensation, Social Security, unemployment insurance, all these things have to be are legal things that are out there that would be included under that umbrella of your employee rights. So next is long-term career development. Looking again long-term, so you're looking at what's your your next 40 hours and versus your next 40 years, if you will. Every day of your work life, you can perform duties that will contribute to your continued career success rather. And what I mean by the success, your career success, is that you developing those good habits, developing things that are going to carry you forward from this current job, maybe it's a low-level job, to a much higher level job. Paying attention to how other people function, how your boss functions, and so on and so forth. Being able to take the good and to separate the good from the bad, and to focus on the better, the good things, and to discount or to be aware of the bad things that are actually happening out there. Training opportunities. Every job that I know of requires more work, meaning more school, more workshops, more training, some sort or another, whether it's voluntary or required. Ultimately, it's required because in order to maintain your job, you have to keep up with things, and whether it's technology or guidelines, regulations, so on and so forth, there are all these things that point toward continued training, continuous training. So there are various methods here. Again, there are formal things and so on and so forth versus informal, including reading about the industry that you're in, learning more about your company, how it works, learning about maybe you're in sales department and you would like to learn more about accounting. You could always go over to the accounting department if you ever have an opportunity to do so, and ask questions there, and to learn things that way. Career paths and advancement. It's like with any other of these financial decisions that we've been talking about, it's continuously keeping up to speed, and setting your goals and reevaluating and continuing on through that same path, except in terms of your career. So a successful technique for coping with the anxieties that are associated with career development is to gain support of a mentor. A mentor is very important, an experienced employee, whether it's in the company that you're in or not, or somebody that's outside of the field altogether. Perhaps you're looking for a mentor, and you could find somebody that you could talk to about your career path down the road with another company. Doesn't matter about the company. It's the idea is that a mentor is somebody that has some experience and will be able to serve as, to help you to find your path, to help you find your path going forward. So changing careers. So we had career paths, and now we're talking about changing careers. Changing jobs may be more difficult than even finding your first job or your second job or your third job. You're on your fourth job and you want to change your career entirely. This happens, whether it's by choice or by economic factors that are beyond your control. So some indications, for example, that it might be time to move on from your current job is that you're not motivated anymore, or the stress levels are just too high, your performance evaluations are not very good or poor, and you're becoming more and more isolated at work. All these things factor in. Limited opportunity for advancement, poor relationship with your superiors or with management in general. It might be time for you to move on. And the reason I say that is that it's better for you to make that choice than for someone else to make that choice for you. So anyways, you carefully assess the financial and personal costs that are associated with that. Opportunity cost, right? Changing careers, changing your path going forward. It's all this is very important. So when we get down to the nuts and bolts of this, we're looking at, we go through, and this is something you can do on your own, is developing your resume and cover letter and the actual interview process itself. And it's important to walk through this, since I suggest that you follow up on this in the book a little more, but I'll go through, just hit some highlights. And so resume basically is a summary of your education, training, experience, other job qualifications, etc. And these are all fine-tuned, meaning that you should be changing these according to the job that you're applying for. It doesn't mean wholesale change necessarily, but you try to fine-tune, focus on something that would make sense. So your personal data section, career objective section, education, experience, and other related information and references perhaps, or it might be something separate, but you should always have a list of references, personal references and professional references. And basically when we're looking at resumes, we're looking at it in terms of different types of resumes. Could be chronological resume, in order of starting from your most recent on the top, going down to your older jobs going, so it's kind of reverse order, if you will. So most current to your older jobs as you go down. Functional resume, or combination resumes, all these things targeted. You always want to target your resume for the company that you're actually looking at. There lots the resumes are changing all the time, but they're basically the same idea, is to convey something to your potential employer. And what you're trying to convey is how your experience, your training, your education, how that fits with that job that they're putting out there. How is it that you would be a good match? And further defining that would be through the cover letter. And cover letter this is where you flesh out your resume, where you point out to things in the resume that are of absolute importance to the employer, how you would be separating yourself from the rest of the folks that have similar resumes. Talking about your background and how this job, it's actually something, it's an exercise for yourself to see if the job is what you really want to do. So keep this in mind kind of as you're going through. Is it this, the process that you're going through, whether we're talking about with resume or with the resume and cover letter, you should always have a cover letter. The cover letter in particular is where you really flesh things out as to whether or not you want the job. Finally, the job interview, this is where you would be going through the process of doing a lot of research, or as much research as possible, into the company itself to prepare yourself. And this is also information finding for yourself about the company, and also to show that you're interested in the job, to be quite frank, to be quite honest with you. Anyway, there's much more to this, but that's the general overview of what we were talking about through chapter 2, if you will. Onward we go. Chapter 3. This is the money management strategy. This is these are the actual financial statements and the budgeting. So we're drilling down to the kind of the nuts and bolts of what we were talking about before, putting this pen to paper, so to speak. So successful money management refers to the day-to-day financial activities necessary to manage current personal economic resources. So whenever you hear, well, money, anyway, the money management refers to, again, what's right in front of you on a daily basis, and what it takes to build toward that longer term financial security. But it's, they're taking care of the pennies. If you focus on the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves, that type of an attitude. That's money management, is looking at your short-term things that are going on out there. So we talk about opportunity cost once again, in money management. There are the trade-offs that are associated with every spending decision we make, every saving decision we make, borrowing decision we make, investing decision that we make. There are trade-offs that are associated with that. That's the trade-off kind of measures the opportunity cost, where the opportunity cost is where we decide for one versus another. That cost that of foregoing that one that we decided to not select, if you will. It has to do with that. It has to do with the trade-off. The opportunity cost is one versus another. The trade-off is measuring that one versus another. So the components of money management would be personal financial records, financial statements, spending plans, or budgets, if you will. They're the foundation of planning and implementing monetary or money strategies, if you will, money management strategies, rather. So, so we're talking about personal financial records, or a system for personal financial records. Money management records. We're looking specifically at trying to organize money management and systematically put it into financial records that make sense, that they would be fitting. They would probably be in the following categories, if you will. One would be money management records. Another would be personal and employment records. The third would be tax records. Fourth would be financial services records, credit records, consumer purchase records, housing and automobile records, insurance records, investment records, estate planning and retirement records. And this may sound, what is the term, anal retentive, but at least in the very beginning, you want to be paying extremely close attention to these details. That's why we try to, where we're going into such great detail, okay? As more documents are provided electronically, it becomes an easier process by which to do this, but it's important to track these nonetheless, just the same, okay? So onward, personal financial statements. So the personal balance sheet and cash flow statements are the typical financial tools that we have. So when we talk about financial statements, accounting statements, etc., the two main ones that we would be looking at, focusing on, would be the balance sheet and the cash flow statement, or the income statement. And simply put, that's the idea, of course, is to track where you're at and to know where you're at, etc. So the balance sheet, the first one we're looking at, it's also known as a net worth statement, and it specifies what it is that you owe. Sorry, of course, I don't have my ringer on. I mean, I have my ringer on, rather. So the point being, again, that with the balance sheet, it's also called the net worth statement. It's specifying, what assets versus liabilities, and we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so at any rate, when we're looking at the balance sheet, we're referring to a snapshot of where you're at, what your financial position is at that point in time. First, we're looking at assets. That's the first item on the balance sheet. They would be listed as starting with the most liquid first. The most liquid meaning as close to cash as you can get. So the amount of cash that you have on hand, maybe your savings, and then moving on down to such things as personal possessions, your real estate, your home, etc. And finally would be your investment assets, the things that you're going to be setting aside for a longer period of time. Those are your assets. On the other side are liabilities. First, you'd have current liabilities, the ones that have to be paid very quickly, the things that happen on a monthly basis, up to maybe about a year. Longer term liabilities would be, again, mortgage payments that are going to be ongoing for next several years. And your net worth then is the difference between your total assets and your total liabilities. Assets minus liabilities equal net worth. There's another expression is that for net worth would be owner's equity, what you have left over, what you actually own. The balance sheet of a business can also be expressed anyway. These can be expressed in many different ways, but assets equal liabilities plus net worth. Another point is when we talk about insolvency, that has to do with like a bankruptcy type of a situation, meaning that you can no longer pay your liabilities. It's just you don't have enough income, if you will, to pay your expenses. Your liabilities are to the point where you're unable to. They're far and away above what your assets are. That's where the insolvency comes in when you have no other choice but to do what? But to declare bankruptcy. So ratios are important, but to keep in mind there are rules of thumb. They're oftentimes used by financial institutions when you're seeking credit and so on and so forth. And those would include such things as like debt ratios, where your liabilities are divided by your net worth, and you want that debt ratio to be as low as possible. In other words, your net worth higher and your liabilities lower, period. The current ratio would be liquid assets divided by current liabilities. And basically what that means is how well are you able to cover your short-term debts, what's upcoming. Liquidity ratio takes your liquid assets, so your cash and savings, near cash type stuff, divided by your monthly expenses. So if you have $5,000 in your checking and savings accounts, for example, and you get $1,000 a month in bills, that means 5 divided by 1, it gets you 5 months where you could cover your expenses if you had no income for 5 months. Debt payment ratio, monthly credit payments divided by your take-home pay. Provides some indication of a person's earnings, how much of it goes toward debt payments every month. And typically you don't count home mortgage. So you discount that, and you kind of go from there. Savings ratio is the amount saved each month divided by your gross income. And they use gross because a lot of times you have free tax savings such as 401k, IRA. Type of arrangements. We'll talk about that as we go forward, but that's the savings ratio. So the cash flow statement then, so we talked about balance sheet, snapshot of where you're at, assets, liabilities, and your net worth, the difference between the two. The cash flow statement, or more typically what it's called is the income statement, but we'll stick with cash flow statement. It means something a little different in financial language, but this is perfectly fine for this class. When we talk about cash flow statements, it measures your input, your inflows, and your outflows during a given period of time. So again, the balance sheet is a snapshot of where you're at, and the cash flow measures your performance, your inflows and your outflows over a period of time. So the statement is a summary of those receipts, what you received, your income and the payments, again, for a period of time. That's the cash flow statement. So income is, we're showing the good guy first again. So your income is all that you're getting upfront, whether we're talking about typically from salaries, so on and so forth, but it could be interest that you're earning on something or else as well too, but that would be your income. Versus the other side of the equation, again, the outflows, those are expenses. And typically when we look at expenses, we talk about fixed expenses versus variable expenses. And fixed expenses, basically things that don't change on a monthly basis. And variable expenses can change, or often do change. And they're not always exactly perfect. But for example, fixed expense, if you have a fixed monthly payment for a mortgage or your rent, typically. We're talking about that. The utilities are often in that category too, because most people, or I shouldn't say most people, many people opt to go with the budget plan for for their utilities. So it spreads it out evenly out throughout the whole year. That would be a fixed expense. Variable expense, again would be an example of that would be if you say this month you're not driving at all for work, but next month you're driving 1,000 miles for the month. So the variable expense associated with that would be, of course, the additional fuel cost, any kind of wear and tear on the vehicle. So onward, we're looking at budgeting now, and budgeting for skilled money management. A budget or spending plan is really what we're saying. An expense budget is another expression, but we're looking at spending plans. So we're looking at a budget that's necessary for successful financial planning. So the main purpose of the budgets are, real quickly, to help you to live within your income, help you to spend your money more wisely, help you to reach your financial goals, help you prepare for financial emergencies, and lastly, and most importantly, probably, is to develop wise financial management habits by going through this process over and over and over again, whether formally or informally, right? So the budgeting process itself, the personal budget, it's an effective scorecard for you to assess your personal economic progress, where you're at that point in time. And a lot of it depends upon your choices in terms of your life, where you're at with career, family, all these things that kind of lead into this, including such things, again, it's like your personal values. All these things impact your personal budget. And so the first thing you do in all cases, in most all cases, you set your financial goals. What it is that you want, what are you aspiring for? What is it you're aspiring to do? What is it you're planning on? Why are you saving money? Are you going to want to go on vacation? So on and so forth. The next step would be to estimate your income. Look at what your expectation is for your income going forward, so that you can establish that as on the income side of your budget. How much money is going to be coming in. And I say estimate. Why they say estimate is because you don't know. So anything can happen with your job, but you just try to, plan accordingly. The next step, speaking of being able to plan accordingly, is to budget for emergency. Try to set aside some funds for emergency, and of course saving. Right. So the saving is always a residual. But so what I'm getting at is that always pay yourself first. Assuming you can, hopefully. But you always try to pay yourself first, and this is what savings really is. It's deferred consumption that you're setting aside for some future purpose. So you're paying yourself first and setting that aside to help to offset such things as those emergencies that arise at some, always come up at some point in time. You budget for fixed expenses. You're budgeting for fixed expenses, things that you know are going to be happening. Again, paying your mortgage, paying your rent, utilities, and such things. And then you try to budget as best you can for variable expenses, for your food, for things that you're buying repeatedly on a very, very short-term basis. And again, back to what I was saying before about this week you're not driving, or this month you're not driving, next month you are driving. So you're setting aside money, budgeting for that increased driving next month, right? Step 6, I guess we're on, record your spending amounts. This is important because what you're driving at least very early on, and throughout the process, but you're trying to get a handle on the inflow and the outflow, because what you're looking at is that you're trying to arrive at, and you will, of course, but what you're budgeting versus what actually happens, what you actually spend, what you actually receive, an income during the month, what you actually spend in that period of time. I said month, but it could be any period of time. Day, month, year, quarter, however you want to do it, or whatever you're looking at. So what it boils down to is that if your spending exceeds your plan, or if your spending exceeds what you planned on spending, you have a deficit. And if you're planning, if you're spending less than what you actually planned, that's called a surplus. So deficits and surpluses. Deficit is you're spending more than you're taking in, and surplus is that you're saving. There is some residual, some saving left over, if you will. Finally, step 7 is to review those habits, the things that you're going through, so that you can re-implement this entire plan, walking through all 7 steps again. So you're constantly going through this and doing this. So characteristics of that successful budgeting process is that things to focus on is that the budget has to be well planned. You have to be realistic with yourself. You have to have some flexibility built into this thing in all of your goals, and when you do the review process, this has to be clearly communicated to yourself. So you have to be able to kind of keep track of what's going on with have some rational sense of what you're dealing with. So there are different types of budgeting systems, and those would include such things as the mental budget, which we always have access to, right? We're always going through this mental budgeting process. Physical budget, meaning pieces of paper, and that's kind of a passé thing in many ways, but it's actually kind of a neat, good tool to employ, where you hold on to receipts and so on and so forth. A written budget with detailed plan for spending and how you did, compared to that plan. Computerized spreadsheets, online budgets. There are tons of those apps that are out there, and there are also budgeting apps for your cell phone, tablet, etc. Right? So, okay, so we're on to number 4, money management and achieving financial goals. So your personal financial statements and budget can be used to achieve financial goals with 1, your balance sheet reporting your current financial position, where you're at now. Your cash flow statement, your income statement, telling what you received, what you spent over the course of the past month, if you will, and your budget. How you did. You're planning. You're planning what you spent, what you planned on spending and saving, and with that end goal of achieving those financial goals, and the end goal of achieving the financial goals that you set up, but also measuring how you did relative to your forecast, what you planned, and what you actually did, the actuals, if you will. So people typically prepare balance sheets. They say 3 to 6 months or whatever. It's whatever you feel you need is what's most important. It's good to kind of review these things on an ongoing basis, but sometimes it's unrealistic to have. In the beginning, you should be doing this regularly, monthly, every 6 months, etc., just to kind of get a handle on these things, because on top of everything else, things change, right? So the other part of this is the cash flow side, is that you want to be measuring, you want to taking it to that next step. The actual budget part of this is where you would be planning your spending and saving between these points of time, on the income statement, and so you can document what you plan to spend and what you actually spent, and hopefully what you saved. So changes in the net worth then result from the cash inflows and outflows. So this is where they tie together, where the balance sheet ties in with the income statement. And that is, or the cash flow statement, is that if you have anything left over, if you have a surplus in terms of your, if you ended up saving some, what that does is it transfers into your balance sheet in terms of increasing your overall net worth, right? So this is the point again, and I'll just be brief about it. When inflows exceed outflows, putting money into your savings or paying off debt will result again in higher net worth. That's the goal. That is at least one of your goals, so that you can do something later on with your increased net worth, right? That's the objective with this. So identifying savings goals, common reasons for savings would be setting my money for those are irregular emergency items and so on and so forth, the irregular unexpected expenses, to replace your vehicle, in 5 years' time. And the more you can save toward that end over the next 5 years, the better off you'll be in terms of your next vehicle that you purchase. Hopefully, if you get the idea that you know you will be buying a car over the next, even though you might have a new car, you will most likely be buying a car 5 years, 10 years from now, what have you. To buy special items, things that you want for, birthday presents and so on and so forth. Again, these are reasons for savings. Provide for long-term expenses, and that's long-term expense, meaning how about retirement? Hopefully you want to be retired for a few years, right, before you kick the bucket. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying that. And you also, reasons for savings would be to earn interest for additional income. So you're trying to build up, you're building upon the savings is the objective. So how do you select those techniques? Or how do you, what techniques can you employ? And this is paying yourself first, right? There are different things. You write a check to deposit into your IRA or so on and so forth. You can write a check. People don't write checks anymore, but you know what I mean, where you take it out right up front on your own. Or you can use payroll deduction, where you authorize your employer to set aside more. Use a piggy bank, save coins, whatever you can come up with. And so lastly, we're looking at calculating those savings amounts. And to achieve the financial objectives, you should convert your savings goals into very specific amounts. Your use of an interest earning savings plan is vital to the growth of your money and achieving your financial goals. So what this means is that just keep track of this. That's what's out there. You don't have to look at your your IRA. You don't have to keep track of your savings on a daily, monthly, weekly, or monthly basis even, but periodically go in to make sure that you're moving along in the direction where you want to go. Okay, so this should really be helpful for you for the review for the exam, and good luck on that. And we're on to chapter 4 next.